People who have been the target of murderers' assassins, how did you survive and why did they target you? They missed. That's about the only reason. It was a random act of violence. A man ran up behind me, put a gun to my head and shot. He flinched or I did and he missed by an inch. Blew out my left eardrum and burned my hair behind my ear. He ran off immediately after. Cops said it was probably a gang initiation thing. I have deafening tinnitus now and horrible anxiety in public. I'm not sure if it counts, but a few years ago in high school, there was this guy that used to trouble everyone by taking naked photos of them when they were changing after PE class. I happened to be one of his targets, so I reported him to my teacher, and eventually he got suspended for about a month and had to attend counseling sessions. One day I was at the bus stop waiting for my bus when suddenly I felt a push on my back and I fell onto the road. Luckily for me, the bus driver stopped the bus in time and I survived. However, I fell directly on my arm and it was fractured. Last I heard, he went to the juvenile center and no one ever had to see this devil again. Oh yeah, this counts, he pushed you in front of a freaking bus. What a creep. I've posted about this before. I was in a really bad abusive relationship. He had many mental issues along with diabetes. This doesn't excuse any of it, as he was aware of what his body was doing and he never got help, but it's important to know it didn't exactly come out of the blue. One night, he seemed bored and started trying to stick his feet in my face. I pushed him away, disgusted, and he exploded. It was a whole lot of action. He started by trying to choke me. I freed myself by grabbing a cat brush, the kind with the sharp metal points, and pushing it into his chest. He let me go but pushed me to the ground and lifted his airsoft rifle and drove it to my head like he was trying to cave in my skull. At the last moment he hesitated. I ran out of the apartment and called the cops. It didn't occur to me until later when I was with a public defender documenting my injuries that he had really wanted to kill me. I had bruising so deep they were black in color, in places I don't even remember him hitting me. He really would have if something in him hadn't hesitated. My ex-boyfriend hired some guy from Chicago to murder me after I broke up with him for selling drugs to my younger sister. Fortunately, my ex and I both had a mutual friend who found out and had more pull with the attempted assassin. Both were Polish immigrants. Ex calls me up later and demands $2,000 from me because he didn't get what he paid for, as the hired gun wouldn't give a refund. It's crazy how that happens. A girl I dated years back stabbed me when I broke up with her. Literally drove home with paper towels against my side to stem the bleeding, and it was soaking through. My seatbelt still has a big blood stain I couldn't clean. Got patched up and never saw her again, and told the story to friends like 6 years later, and their first question was, did she go to prison? That was literally the first moment it ever occurred to me maybe I should have reported her to the police or something. 6 years later. I was on an almost school shooters list. Me and my friend tried to befriend a kid with pretty bad Asperger's. He was known to have horrible anger management issues, always got in a lot of trouble and was somewhat infamous, but we thought he deserved at least a couple friends. The plan was to just kinda sit with him at lunch and apart from that carry on with our lives as normal. But being he had very little social skills, never had friends and no boundaries, he didn't know how to handle it. Very sad, he would come up to us at bad times while I was at practice, talking to girls or teachers, and would message us online day and night. We tried to have a talk with him about boundaries and how friends give each other space, etc., but this just made him feel rejected and infuriated him. He became more obsessed and more persistent. Around this time I got my first girlfriend and started hanging out with her at school, so my other friend was the one who had handled it more than I did. A few weeks later found the kid tried beat the shit out of my friend. He got stopped by other kids and the campus police officers. He was expelled and sent to a school for people with disabilities. I was honestly relieved he would be somewhere more equipped to help him. After that I kinda just forgot about it. About 3 months later I got called into the administration office and walked into a room with the dean of students and a police officer. I started panicking because in those days I smoked a lot of weed and thought I might have gotten caught. I was informed that the kid's mom found a list in his room of maybe 10 people that he wanted to shoot. We were number 1 and 2. His parents were divorced, and I guess the dad had guns, so the mom panicked and called the police. The officer asked me if I was scared. I said no, I thought the kid was the kind to make empty threats out of anger and wouldn't go through with something like that, but my friend was terrified. I don't know what came of that from a legal standpoint. Last I heard the kid got help and figured it out and is going to college. He actually messages me happy birthday every year. I don't respond. About a year ago, I was walking my dog at night when I saw this really beat up old Honda Civic pull up on the other side of the road. I noticed that two similar cars positioned themselves on the roads perpendicular to me, both behind and in front of me. I was boxed in. This kid no older than 19 gets out with two other people, and the kid reaches for a gun in his waistband and makes a beeline towards me. A random car passes and they all scatter. Once the car is gone, they come back and try to do the same thing, but another random car passes again, and they take off. I made the quarter-mile run home in about 2 minutes. My guess is I was the victim of a gang initiation, and they ran away when witnesses saw. I was almost murdered. If it wasn't for my manager, I would have been. My sister set me up on a date with her friend. I ended up having to work the weekend, so I cancelled. The date went out with someone else and afterwards invited him to her apartment. Right before they went inside, someone killed them both with a gun. It turned out to be a jealous neighbor of the girl who she was also messing with. That could have been me if I went on the date and she decided to let me in for tea. While it seemed strange at the time, I actually didn't find out about the circumstances until 20 years later. I worked at the White House during the Clinton administration in an IT capacity and was traveling on a trip to the Philippines and the APEC conference in Jakarta, Indonesia. We had flown into Manila late and hopped on the bus to the hotel with the staff motorcade. Everyone was pretty awake and we were all buzzing on the ride to the hotel. About 45 minutes into the ride, I look out the window of the bus and we are on a narrow road lined by corrugated tin shacks. It really seemed strange at the time, since why would the road from the airport to the nice hotels in Manila have to go through this neighborhood? We eventually arrived at the hotel and it was quickly forgotten. 20 years later, I am watching a series on the History Channel about the United States Secret Service. This one episode was about how the Secret Service coordinates with intelligence agencies and talked about on a Clinton trip to Manila where they overheard Al-Qaeda was talking about a wedding cake under the bridge. Wedding cake was a known code word for bomb. Clinton was diverted to the alternate route and undoubtedly got to the hotel a lot quicker than we did. It turns out there was indeed a bomb under the bridge on the route to the hotel. I was obviously not the target, but it was crazy, and many of us could have been collateral damage. I can actually answer this. I live below an insane person in a shared house. For the record, I lived there first. Insane person wanted the entire house to rent, tried to force me out many ways, making noise, having people creep around and knock on my windows, call the cops on me for no reason, etc. So one day he lit a smoldering fire in the non-functional fireplace. We were told never to use it and closed his off, forcing the smoke to fill my apartment. We luckily got out, but the hospital said 1 more hour in there and we would be dead. Me and my husband spent several hours in the hospital on oxygen. My dad had replaced our smoke detector literally 2 weeks prior to this incident as we discovered it was broken. Since the laundry was in my part of the house, insane person could totally have come in and tampered with it, but I have no evidence of this. The funniest part of the whole thing was when I called 911 and the fire trucks showed up at 3 a.m., insane person cussed me out for calling them. The second funniest part was work tried to get me to come in that day since nobody could cover my shift. All that effort to rent out a tear-down house in a sketchy neighborhood. Not sure if this one counts, but I was born in Iraq at the very start of the war. My parents tried shielding us from the war and death outside, but sometimes things just happened the likes of which they had no control over. I was about 5 years old. I can't remember my exact age, but all I can remember is that I was too young to attend elementary school. My mom was getting my siblings ready for school, brushing my sister's hair, and I was sitting on her tailoring bench with a curtain-less window behind me. I remember playing around with some pins she had laying around. My grandma, alive at the time, was watching over me so I do not fall. Thus, when a pin dropped from my hand to the floor, she was quick to tell me to pick it up so no one would step on it. I bend down to pick up the pin and I hear a pop, similar to the popping sound of a balloon. I glance back and the window was gone, and all I hear next is my sister scream and start crying. My mom quickly yelled for all of us to get against a wall and to get away from the window. As we all look around the room to see what happened, we see a bullet, as long as an index finger, in the middle of the room. One of my brothers goes over to pick it up, but it was too hot to touch. The next day we go over to the police and all they can do is tell us that it was a sniper bullet and they can't do anything about it. I assume that a sniper saw me just sitting there in front of a window and took the shot, but it missed me when I bent down to pick up the pin, so it went over my head, grazing my sister's arm before stopping on the floor. I'm not going to say this person's relation to me because I don't want any way of this getting back to them or me. For simplicity, this person will be called Chris. Chris has a pretty bad stepdad during their youth. The kind that made Chris steal, swindle, cheat, and con others out of money for his benefit. This was when Chris was around 10 or so and went on for around 6 years. Chris's mother and sibling were terrified of the stepdad and tried to find ways out. A couple of attempts later and the stepdad was getting more angry than usual. I can't remember the spark that lit the powder keg, but I know of 2 times when the stepdad tried to kill the family. First one was when he hired a local to break into the house and shoot them. What happened was that the local came to the house and told Chris and his family that stepdad tried to hire him, but he refused. This was when they finally left. Chris was around 19 to 21 around then. Chris, knowing that stepdad wasn't the one to quit this easily, stayed on guard for a while and took precautions. One precaution that he took was to get a coworker to help protect him. This was a 6'5" giant of a man with the muscle to back up his size. Came from a rough past as well, so he knew how to defend himself. So they are finishing up a night shift when Chris looked outside and saw 4 people in the parking lot with bats. Chris told the coworker and expected him to get a bat of his own to scare them off. What actually happened was that coworker walked outside, pulled a handgun from his pants, and started screaming like a rabid ape. Scared the shit out of them and they left. This was around a month after the first attempt. Last I've heard of stepdad, he approached Chris outside Chris's house, and Chris knocked his ass to the ground. Recently, Chris found out stepdad died about 3 years ago, so that put them at ease. I was targeted because I saved a victim not long ago, or so I thought. A friend was being chased by a creep that probably had those kind of intentions, being my friend a young beautiful female. I just protected both of us. The same guy that attempted the assault, I thought, assaulted me right next to my house and failed to shoot. Instead he shot my right leg and crashed 2 ribs. 1 month after that, police found out that he was one of my ex-boyfriends under the line of, if she is not mine, she can't be with another. Okay, I don't normally talk about this. When I was in the military, I was stabbed in the back, right where the kidneys are. So backstory, I was stationed at North Island. This was my first command out of boot camp and school for my job. In the military it's typical, or was at the time, to be sent what's called TAD, temporary assigned duty, to another place for a crap job for about 6 months. If you're assigned to a ship you go cranking, working in the galley doing food services and stuff. Because I was not assigned to a ship, my TAD was working at a barracks as a desk clerk and cleanup. One night after getting off work, a few friends of mine were going to go out for a movie. We went to our quad in the barracks to change, and one of the rooms was having a party. We walked into a guy laying on our common area table. He was not doing well at all. Way too much to drink. One of the girls we were with told the guys that drunk guy needed to go to the hospital. At first I refused. When she went to call 911 they said they would bring him and picked him up and took him out. Next morning I woke up for work and base police were already there. Apparently they dumped the kid in his room where he died, either from asphyxiation of alcohol poisoning. I was asked first if I knew anything because I worked there. I told them everything. The 2 guys ended up going to the brig for a long time, but because I told I started receiving death threats. In my command's infinite wisdom they moved me a building over for my safety. About a month later I was heading up to my room at about 2 a.m. after I got off watch. I heard people coming up the stairs behind me, but didn't think anything of it. Next thing I remember I was laying in the stairway with a pounding head and bleeding out of my back. Apparently they slammed my head off a brick wall and stabbed me in the back. One of my friends found me as I was dazed and confused, trying to make my way to my room, leaving a trail of blood behind me. At the hospital the doctor said it looked like they got the knife stuck in my muscles as I tensed up. They came very close to getting my kidney. Stab wound. They never caught the person or persons who did it. I am now very anxious in crowds of people.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Reddit stories. Mothership will be glad with you.